Let's talk unintended consequences. I believe I previously made a video speaking about during the pandemic the fact that in New York, I believe it is, the vast majority of the people who are hesitant for getting the jab can be found in the black population. And in fact, a lot of them are in the young black population, not just some older people buying into some strange older person conspiracy, but younger people also. And that's part of the unintended consequences in things. That if you have now policies that segregate or separate based on the hesitancy status of someone, then you'd be unwittingly, in some cases, or probably even knowingly, engaging in targeted victimization against a specific group. Now, there's one side in that is unintended, and it's just one of the faults that happens whenever you make nearly any decision that has effect over a large group of people. And then also there's another side in that where if someone knows where there might be a possibility where something seeming like a neutral action could have a biased final reaction, then they could abuse such a system. So I think that's something that we always need to try to pay attention to. And it's very difficult because unintended consequences gives the idea that it wasn't something that was thought about and planned out. This was unintended, and many times when something was unintended, it would have been unplanned also and unpredicted. This time I'm going a little past the racial component of the mandates and the whole hesitancy to do it, which is a very interesting thing in and of itself. One of my friends and I was speaking about it, and we were talking about they were telling me the fact that a lot of the discussion in and around it does have an American flavor. Even some of the black people in the States, when they speak about the mandates and how they view it and how they view the world history of it, they speak as if the world history is American history. So there's a kind of insularity there. But then I was thinking about that on a further level. And I remember I spoke about an article that could have been 3+ months ago, where I believe it was in Antigua, their prime minister was making a comment that he noted hesitancy was much higher in the black community than in the expats and other whites in the country. And that was also noted in many of the other islands. So even beside the American factor, there does seem to be something that links people of African heritage with some greater level of hesitancy, at least in this case. And I think that may be very interesting to attempt to dig deeper in. But that's not where I'm going today. I'm actually speaking about women. And it seems like COVID-19 is part of the patriarchy. If you're familiar with the feminist language, you'd understand what I'm speaking about. But the consequences that are being left in the trail of COVID-19 are negatively affecting women in the workplace. It's something that can be easily mapped out. It's not something that is a question. It's something that the data has already been in on. Before we get fully into that and see what these articles say, if you haven't clicked that like button yet, please do tap that like button, smash that like button, whichever one you choose. Drop a comment, tell me what you think. Tell me what you think at the end of the video, or even tell me now what you think you're going to think about when you hear the rest. Or you could wait till the end like any other person. And if you haven't yet subscribed, please do subscribe. Now would be a good time to do that. After COVID-19, more women are considering scaling back at work. US survey. Now, this article is from the ending of September, and there's been some more data since then, but we're going through this to set the framing first. Women, the survey found out, were more likely to report experiencing burnout than men, a gap that's widened in the last year too. Pandemic burnout is nipping at the slow but steady progress women have made up and down the corporate ladder over the last 5 years. A McKinsey & Company report conducted in partnership with Lean In organization released Monday finds in an annual survey of 65,000 workers across 423 organizations, 1/3 of women said they were considering scaling back their careers or leaving the workforce altogether. That figure jumped almost 10 percentage points from the beginning of the months of the pandemic. Women, the survey found, were more likely to report experiencing burnout than men, a gap that's widened in the last year too. Our concerns are the impact of pandemic burnout on women long term and what companies need to do in response, said Rachel Thomas, co-founder and chief executive officer of Lean In. Now, I think obviously, and we'll get to some articles saying that, but obviously in this, the burnout isn't necessarily just a plain comparison of who is able to take more workplace stress. The burnout is symptomatic of something else, that there are other considerations, especially when you're talking about women. And women would have other considerations that would be coming up at a much higher level of priority now that the pandemic would be pushing to that level of priority, pushing to the front. And because of that, it would make the career side be a lower level of priority in some people's life. Just today, I was watching a study that, I can't remember the university that did it, but a study that they did to find out where people ranked different things in terms of where they found their happiness in life. And it was found, at least not surprising to me, but it was found that many women, the vast majority of women, rated family and building a family and caring for their family as holding a much higher level of giving them long-term happiness in their life. So if that is a fact, this makes sense. Why? If you force women now to have the choice between caring for their family, creating a family, or staying in the workplace and moving up the corporate ladder, I'm not surprised that we're finding more women dropping out now. And the numbers prove that also. I believe between the months of February to March in the United States, there was something like 1.1 million women who left the workforce. And I think it was quite a bit more in terms of ratio-wise women leaving the workforce to men. But that's not the only problem. You see, there's one with leaving the workforce because a lot of jobs were shut down during the pandemic. There weren't much jobs to do. So leaving the workforce at the beginning of the pandemic, that makes sense. Nearly everyone left the workforce to some extent during that time. Well, at least the vast majority of people. The problem now, though, is on the returning to the workforce because in most countries right now, we are seeing slow reopening. Most countries, if you're looking at their unemployment numbers would slowly be dropping or their employment numbers would slowly be rising. And that's currently going on in the United States. I believe this last month, though, they had some disappointing numbers. It didn't rise as much as they thought it would have risen. And one of the major factors that pulled down that job numbers growth, was the fact that not many women returned to their jobs. In fact, so few women returned to their jobs that the net movement was more women left their jobs, at least in the United States, for the last month than women went back to their jobs. There was a net loss in women in the job place for the last month. And this is supposed to be during recovery time during the pandemic. And these are some of the unintended consequences. That's what we're speaking about. Because I don't think that when governments were deciding on the lockdowns that they were aiming at getting women out of the workplace. I don't think so. They were aiming at trying to stop this virus, trying to do whatever measures they can. But now, when you affect the workplace like that, remember, I keep saying, these connections we have in the economy, the whole supply chains that we have been built over centuries. This world that we currently reside in has been built slowly over many years. And stopping some of these things, stopping some of the things that we have gained progress in, or at least what we deem to be progress in, kind of just throws us back to a certain level where we'd have to work back through it again. But also, on a side of that, I think some of the questions that the pandemic is putting at the forefront for people to decide are important questions about life. To sound very philosophical now, are important questions about life that otherwise many people would not have thought of. That many women may have joined a career and just gone on in the career without even thinking about their family life, etc., etc. And the pandemic could throw that in a certain light now that you are forced to think about it more seriously than you otherwise would have. And maybe you could make a decision that may be more in line with something that you actually desire. And that's what I always say. When it comes to these discussions of what women really want and where women's play, that's not it to me. The question is, each person has to decide honestly to themselves what they want and work towards what you want. The problem is being honest with yourself, I think. Many people struggle with that. A childcare crisis is keeping women out of the workforce for longer. This is from the 10th of October. School may be in session, but the dearth of childcare is still proving to be a major hurdle to women re-entering the US labor market. The number of women on payrolls last month fell for the first time since the winter coronavirus surge in December 2020. And the drop was even more pronounced for those ages 25 to 44, who are more likely to have to school-age children. The decline was a major driver behind the slowdown in overall job growth in the country. The jobs report released Friday came as a surprise because many anticipated that the return to school would alleviate the childcare burden, which mostly falls on mothers. The data suggests that uncertainty around Delta variant of the coronavirus, which has led to quarantines and a partial return to virtual learning in some cases, will continue to keep parents from seeking a job. Because at the end of the day, most people who make children, most of the parents, tend to hold their children in a pretty high level of priority. And when it all comes down to it, if the choice is between the child and a job, well, you know what's going to happen. And then if you have a case where you have both parents in a family and then the choice is someone needs to work and someone needs to take care of the child, then we so easily revert to this system that many people would call sexist in some other way. But to some extent, it seems like when people's back is against the wall and they don't have much choices in the matter, it's somewhat of a default status that many humans just return to. So maybe some of these things are less sexist and there is an aspect of just dimorphism, man being man and woman being woman, and they're being better at different things. What do you think? Tell me if some of this does lean into some of that suggestion, or it's just that the coronavirus and the lockdowns are sexist in their nature. And there's an interesting bit of play on the data that comes out of all of this. In Texas, something that they noted is while the women are losing more jobs, or not losing, but leaving more jobs, the wage gap between men and women has actually decreased. You know, the wage gap where for every $1 a man makes, some women, according to where in the world you look at the statistics, some women make 81 cents on it, some make 75 cents, some make 85 cents, etc., etc. In Texas, I believe for a while it was 81 cents. Women made 81 cents on every dollar a man made. And now, during the pandemic, when more women left the workforce, women, I believe the figure rose to 87 cents on a dollar, each dollar a man makes. And I am not enjoying the fact that some people are losing their jobs and maybe struggling to make ends meet. But I do enjoy the fact that in this, we could see some of the play that happens with data and how you could misread some of the data sometimes. Very often, many people have heard explain the whole wage gap and how we see it. The fact is that it is a general number taken for all the men working and all the women working. And if you check up all the men that work, they generally make more money than all the women that work. Because men generally take more risky jobs, men work longer hours, etc., etc. That's some of the reasons for the existence of the wage gap. Now, in this case, some of the reasons that I saw flying around there for why you could see the wage gap actually decreasing is because in many cases, the women that may be more likely to leave or lose their jobs maybe women on the lower end. So many of the women making more money would be staying in their jobs. But when people are returning to jobs, many of those that would return first would be men on the lower end. And many men on the lower end are actually in essential jobs also. So many of those men working in essential jobs on the lower end would still be there weighing down the male earnings with their lower earnings, while many of the women who would have earned lower amounts of money would just stay home and take care of their family instead of doing that. So when you check those two averages now for the people in the jobs, it actually increases the average of the woman as compared to the man. Very interesting how the data could be played with like that. Now, here's the thing. I think this bears a lot of relevance to Trinidad and Tobago and to the wider Caribbean also, because I believe the wider Caribbean, at some point in time, every Caribbean territory may be looking to reopen their schools. And a lot of this, as we have heard, is actually linked to schools, linked to children. And in Trinidad and Tobago, we were talking about reopening the forms 1 to 3s. And that may be part of that also, because as you open more of these schools, what you are doing is providing an opportunity to let more women specifically into the workforce. Because what will happen if you're reopening the economy while schooling is still left in a position where many children must be home? You're going to force a lot more women to be home to look after the children. That's just the reality of it. It's just the reality of how the things generally go. That's just the reality of it. Very often with younger children and the day-to-day caretaking needs, more often you'd find women doing that and more suitable to do that in many cases. So the longer schools remain closed, the more women would be left out of the workplace. And it's an unintended consequence, but I don't think an insignificant consequence. I think that's something that is permanently changing our societies currently. And many things during this current pandemic, the new normal that many people speak about so flippantly, I think would be causing some changes, permanent changes within our cultures and within our societies that many people have no idea are going to happen and are right on the horizon. I saw, just in closing, I saw someone speak about an article I saw on The Guardian where they spoke about Royal Castle ran out of pepper. And they were like, why is this news? I could understand that sentiment. But I think when you link the Royal Castle running out of pepper with all the other news about supply chains being stunted, and right now in the US, flights being grounded, and there are container ships halted outside of ports waiting for entry. Markets all around, they have the demand for the goods, but the goods just aren't coming in, and shipping and transportation prices are going through the roof. Then the relevance of that pepper story starts to come a little more into scope. Maybe that will be my video tomorrow. But as I was saying, unintended consequences. More women are leaving the workforce, and maybe less would be entering the workforce also. Looking forward, many women may be seeing that in this present climate, that may not be, at least from the current look of it, may not be seeming to have significant changes back to the old normal anytime soon. Many people, if you're looking to plan a family, the way you may have done it 3 years ago may be completely different already than the way you may have to do it now. It's just the new normal, I guess. That's all I have for now. I hope you're informed, entertained, or educated. And please do click that like button. Don't forget that. I'll give you 2 seconds to do that now. Rising with the time.